Hi and welcome to the Wales Cooperative Centre Communities Creating Homes network event on Robert Owen and past and present. So we have these monthly sessions, as I've just said, every month, and there's a different focus of each one. We're the Communities Creating Homes programme, and we're here to support communities across Wales to start community-led housing projects. We're very pleased that we're funded by the Welsh Government and the Nationwide Foundation, and we're also partnered with DTA Wales, who support what we call the Explore part of our programme. Nicola is here on the call today, and she'll be introducing a session that we've got coming out next month, a bit later on the call. On vision and values. Just to say also that our next monthly session is on June the 17th. It's a kind of interesting time in community-led housing in Wales at the moment, because housing has just been incorporated into a kind of super department, specifically looking at climate. So we are part of a new Welsh Government Ministry on climate, and we'll be focusing on our network event next month, specifically on climate and well-being in relation specifically to energy efficiency. And we've invited two great speakers from Optimise Retrofit and from Nest, which are two government-supported programmes in Wales to develop energy efficiency programmes, which also support people's well-being as well. We are a kind of eclectic group of people on this network meeting. As I say, mostly we tend to be based in Wales, but today and in other meetings we very much welcome people from other parts of the UK and further afield. We are a mix of people who are already living in community-led housing. For example, we have Steve Jones, I think, on the call today, who lives in Dragons Co-op and is very keen on Robert Owen. And he'll be chiming in, I'm sure, at certain points of discussion about Robert Owen. And they're based very close to Robert Owen's birthplace in Newtown. And we also have a lot of aspiring community housing groups like Broncleys Wellbeing Park, who are here today, who are looking to construct affordable homes for people in their area. So that's the kind of mix of people we have coming along to these network of events. We like to give people an opportunity to have some conversation as well and chat and to meet each other. So we always have breakout rooms, and we'll be doing that a couple of times with this session. We've got three speakers today, and the first speaker, Chris Coates, is author of several books, including Utopia Britannica, and is very knowledgeable about Robert Owen. And after Chris has spoken, we'll go into what I'm calling the then breakout room, a little bit of an opportunity to talk about then and what happened then, and also to maybe answer the question, is failure the compost of success? And to think about failure a little bit, and how we can learn from projects of the past and projects of today as well. The breakout session will last for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back into the main room, and I'm really pleased to have Maureen Jones from Chapeltown Co-Housing in Leeds, and Simin Wadiwala from Student Co-op Homes and Brighton. And Sea Salt Housing Cooperative in Brighton, talking about two pioneering projects of today. And after that, we'll have a breakout room looking at the now, and then asking the question, perhaps if you're in those rooms, what does success look like now? And that can be for a whole wide range of different elements you might want to be thinking about. I really wanted to bring these projects into the room because they're pioneering new approaches to diversity and financial inclusion, and making sure that their projects are applicable to as many people as possible. And I think there's lots of learning to be had from that. So without further ado, I would like to invite Chris to share his screen and to introduce the man Robert Owen himself, and I believe take us on a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of some other Owenite communities of the day. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as Alan said, I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the lesser-known sort of Owenite projects that happened. I think in the sort of Owenite world, I'm a bit of a heretic in that I don't really like Robert Owen, and he's a very interesting character, partly because he lived for his time to a ripe old age, and got involved in lots of different things, and potentially went on a number of very contradictory journeys in his life. I mean, he started off as a successful capitalist businessman, and yet is credited with being one of the sort of founder members of socialism and the whole cooperative movement. He was incredibly autocratic and egotistical, as far as I can see, if you read any of his original writings. He wrote huge amounts. He was very prolific. He must have been a very good public speaker. He hobnobbed with the great and good, but on the other hand, he inspired a whole working class Owenite movement. And he was also a radical thinker. He was anti-church, he was anti sort of organized religion, but later in his life became involved in spiritualism. And yeah, that's a bit that quite a lot of academics conveniently like to park to one side and forget about. But so he's a really interesting character. The bits that interested me were what we would now call community-led housing schemes that either Owen inspired or was directly involved with himself. And that's what I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of now. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go F5. Slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to just make sure this works. I'm going to start with a warning. If you ever come across anybody wanting to join your scheme bearing any resemblance to Robert Owen himself, steer well clear. I wrote an essay for a book called New Views of Society at the last Robert Owen memorial, and this is what I said in there: that reflecting on the flowering of the Owenite movement activity 200 years ago, I find myself asking whether there is anything to learn from this early period of community forming. Are there any parallels with 20th century intentional communities? Are there any lessons to be learned from Robert Owen and his fellow travellers? My initial reaction is to issue a community health warning. If you come across anyone bearing a resemblance to Robert Owen himself, steer well clear. Anyone with an ego anywhere near the size of Owen's wants to be shown the door of any communal venture before they can cause trouble. Whilst being a huge inspiration to his own movement, he appears to have been a great hindrance to achieving any community forming aims. Okay, with that warning, I'm going to take you through a sort of whistle-stop tour of Owenite communities. The most well-known is New Lanark. This was sort of, there's debate about how much Owen was involved with this. He sort of came into it through marriage, took over what was already a successful business, and then introduced all these sort of radical ideas, educational ideas, housing ideas, labour credit and labour payment ideas, all sorts of things. This was a sort of melting pot for his original ideas. When I first heard about New Lanark, it was in this state. It was derelict. This is going back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. The place had been in decline for a number of years. It was then taken over by a sort of restoration project. And I'm not going to dwell very much on this. There's lots of information on the internet, and you can go and visit New Lanark now. It is now a World Heritage Site. It's got hotels, a museum. It's well worth a visit if you're in. It's just off the motorway on your way to Glasgow. There's plenty of information about this. It overshadows all the other Owenite communities in this country, some of which are sort of nobody's ever heard of. There are a few which I'm going to cover now that have sort of garnered some interest. First, and partly Owen wrote essays himself, and they have been pretty much in print ever since he wrote them. They're still reprinted today, particularly New View of Society. And I've got a feeling this is why he's so well known and so sort of well referenced by so many different people, really. His idea of, and this is a sort of illustration of his idea of his ideal community post the work he'd done at New Lanark. This is a sort of artist's impression of what an Owenite community would look like if it was sort of taken from his ideas in a New View of Society. It's this huge sort of block with sort of factories in the middle and parkland, and yeah, this was an architect's impression. Owen took a lot of his own inspiration for these communities from a group called the Moravian Church. The Moravian Church were religious exiles from Moravia who came over in the late 1600s on their way initially to America. They wanted to petition Charles II to grant them some land to settle in the United, well, they weren't the United States then, in North America. And they were a very radical Christian sect. And I don't know whether some of their ideas filtered into Owen's ideas. This is a sort of a layout. It's actually a photo of an information board from the Moravian settlement just outside Derby at a place called Opbrook, which started in 1750. It is set out round a square. Yeah, you can go along and visit. The Moravians still own it and run it. And their sort of radical form of Christianity included things like marriage guidance, sex education. I mean, and this is back in the sort of 1700s. And they lived as a community. They also had a good reputation for the quality of their education. And in fact, one or two of their communities became well-known schools later on. But they seem to be the inspiration behind Owen's ideas of community. Having said that, nobody really tried to build, whilst they were inspired by Owen's ideas, tried to build anything that ever looked like the model that came out. The other one that's sort of well referenced is a place called Harmony Hall. This is in Hampshire. It is known as the official Owenite community. Yeah, they didn't build the sort of great square. they built a sort of, I don't know, a minor sort of manor house. It was designed by an architect who also built Birmingham Town Hall. And actually the building bears a faint resemblance in style to the same. It didn't last very long. As you can see, it lasted, and Owen didn't live there. He was heavily involved in the formation of it, and kept coming down and basically wandering around, ordering people, telling people what they ought to be doing, even though he had no actual involvement in running the place. And it fell apart largely to do with well, I think two reasons if you look at the book. One is a sort of perennial problem of trying to get academics to do farming work, shall I sum it up sort of like that. People with no skills being expected to jump in and basically run a self-sufficient community without any background in farming. After 1845, it became a Quaker school, and unfortunately it burnt down in 1921. The building burnt down, and I did go and visit the site, and all that is left is this lamppost, sort of in the woods, like a sort of something from Narnia. The site's grown over, and there's just a sort of lamppost in the woods. So that's the sort of the official one. And oh right, okay. The other one that gets a lot of mention is an Irish community in Rallahine in County Clare. It was a landowner who spoke with Robert Owen and decided that he wanted to carry out an experiment on his estate in setting up a cooperative community with the workers who already worked on his estate. It was actually quite successful, largely because you'd got the opposite effect to the Harmony Hall. You'd actually got sort of agricultural workers. There are still some buildings left on the site. These are now sort of animal accommodation, but they were the original cottages for the workers. Unfortunately, the landowner lost his estate gambling, and the project was wound up after only a couple of years. It looked as if it stood a good chance of being successful had the landowner not had a vice of gambling away all his riches. The next one here, I don't know why this keeps, please move this window away. I don't know why that's there, sorry. In Scotland, inspired by Robert Owen, another businessman called Abraham Coombe set up a quite successful community and built a large accommodation block at a place called Orbiston. Unfortunately, this is all that remains of that community. It is just a pillar of the building that claims to be the first purpose-built working class housing in this country, sort of that involved the people who were going to live there in designing it. They had an input with they worked with the architect. It again fell apart because of the financial backing. Abraham Coombe, who was the financial backer, was a Quaker, but got into financial troubles. And in fact, after he died, his brother wound the community up, sold it back to the original landowner, who was so appalled that they were living next to this sort of socialist experiment, had the whole place demolished. So you will have noticed that these communities are in what are now the sort of devolved nations, which I haven't really worked out sort of what the factor was then. The next one that pops up is in the Welsh valleys. And I find this one the most interesting. This perhaps has the longest legacy and is the least well known of the Owenite communities. It was John Moggridge was the local landowner, and there was a whole influx of coal miners into the area when they discovered coal in the valley. And John Moggridge had heard Robert Owen speak and decided he was going to try his own version of what were called villages of cooperation. And what he did was he very generously gave very long-term leases on plots of land and allowed the miners to build, who were relatively well paid, allowed them to build their own houses. And that turned into what is now the small town of Blackwood. That is the foundation of the town, this sort of self-build project, cooperative self-build project with a benevolent landowner. And I mean, the legacy is that it was the foundation of a town. So yeah, I find the Blackwood the most interesting of the Owenite communities. The last one I'm going to talk about is in Cambridgeshire, which got quite a lot of publicity recently. As you can see, the press latched on to the most salacious details of this community. In 2016, the Cambridge Archaeology Department started a archaeological dig of the Mainey colony in Cambridgeshire. This was, I don't know what you might describe it. It was described at the time as an unofficial Owenite community. Again, a local landowner was the backer, but this time he chose to be part of the community. It was based on the used washes, and they made their money out of selling clay bricks. They were a brickworks, but they took a lot of Owen's ideas about being anti-religious, being actually anti-marriage. That's where the wife swapping headline comes from. And the dig was to find out how much of the blueprint. There's quite a lot of evidence around. They wrote their own magazine called The Working Bee. So there's quite a lot of documentary evidence about this community. Quite how much of their original plans were built, we don't know. And that's what the archaeological dig was trying to find out. This is a model that's of the community based on some architectural drawings. It bears a resemblance to Owen's original plans. It's a large, well, it's not on the same scale, but there's a sort of quadrangle with housing around the side, and that in the middle is the school surrounded by a moat. Quite why whether it was to keep the children in or teach them swimming, no one's very clear. That doesn't seem to have ever been built. It was there on the original drawings. There is again quite a lot of documentation about this, and there's a very useful, if you're interested, there's a sort of 15-20 minute video of the Mainey colony on the Cambridge University's Archaeology Department's YouTube channel, which gives a lot of background to what they found. The community folded because the bank that William Hodson, who was the landowner, had his money in, went into liquidation, and he lost all his money. He eventually emigrated to America and joined a a sort of intentional community over there in the early 1800s. There were other Owenite communities, smaller ones, of which very little is known, very little documentation. There are about records of, or mentions in literature of about another 15 very small sort of experiments inspired by Robert Owen. Nothing on the scale of the ones I've shown you. Okay, I'm going to end with a quote from Robert Owen. This was almost Robert Owen's last words. He fell ill at a speaking engagement, and they called a priest over because they thought he was going to die there and then on him. He lived a little longer, and the priest said, well, I mean, Robert Owen tried to shoo the priest away, going, "No, go away, I don't believe in all that sort of thing," and said, "Well, don't you think you've wasted your life? What have you achieved?" And this was Owen's reply, that my life was not useless. I gave important truths to the world, and it was only for want of understanding they were disregarded. I have been ahead of my time. And I think the legacy of Robert Owen, whatever I or anybody may think about him, and he is a complicated character. I think, yeah, his legacy has stood the test of time. He was a pioneer, or a pioneer and an inspiration for community-led housing 250 years ago. That's me, Alan. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic, Chris.
Whistle-stop tour of the world of community housing a la Robert Owen.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. And there's been lots of chat in the chat, and I'll catch up on some of that while I send everybody into breakout rooms. So yeah, and then we'll have any questions and answers maybe at the end. And Chris will be going into a breakout room too, so I'm sure he'll be there and wherever he lands to talk more about that. And if you want to know more, there's Chris's excellent book Utopia Britannica, which sort of covers the community-led housing movement, I guess, up till 1945. And it's fascinating tour de force really of community housing, and I read it during my recent staycation, and it was very, very enjoyable, so I recommend that. I will create the breakout rooms now. While I'm doing that, I wondered if Nicola from DTA Wales wanted to introduce the session that she's organising on vision and values in June.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alan. So we have a session planned for Monday, the 14th of June from 12 o'clock until 1:30. It's going to be based on Zoom. We're just getting the final Eventbrite and advertising sorted, but details will be out very soon. It's around knowing your vision, values and purpose. And there's a focus on for community-led housing groups. So the concept is that the session will help you to look and understand why you should fully explore and agree your group's purpose and values before embarking on the next step of the journey. Whether you're a new group or just a few individuals or even an established group who are already moving forward with exciting plans, it's essential to take time out to focus on these fundamental elements of the group dynamics. So as Alan mentioned earlier, I'm based with the DTA and support the groups on the explore stage of communities creating homes. So we're felt that this event would be useful for those groups, but also, as I said, more established groups, that it's quite useful just to take time out to make sure you're all on the same page as group members. So I think that's about it, Alan.
Thanks, Nicola. Thank you. So yeah, I'm ready to open the rooms. It's 10 minutes. and I hope you have a good chat. And you know, the rooms are for whatever you want to make them, really. But yeah, I think that Chris's talk has brought up all sort of elements around the theme of failure for different reasons, and I think that kind of lessons learned element would be really good to focus on. And you know, is failure the compost of success is a quote that was often quoted at an organisation I used to work for, which was in itself a Owenite community, I guess, in the Centre for Alternative Technology. Yeah, if you go into your room and have a chat, I'll see you all back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Fantastic. It looks like you're all back in the room, I think, in the main room. I hope you all had like interesting and fruitful discussions and got to meet some people you hadn't met before and had a chat. And yeah, feel free to pop any thoughts into the chat you want to share with other people. Yeah, I'd like to introduce now our next speaker, who is Maureen Jones, who is part of the Chapeltown co-housing community, which I believe are just about to, well, they're under construction at the moment. And I wanted to invite Chapeltown along because Maureen at Chapeltown along because they have, partly because they have a really interesting kind of financial model, and they've really worked hard to include as many different members of the community as possible in their community. So yeah, we've also got, as well as Maureen, Cynthia Braithwaite is in the room as well today. So if you happen to be in a breakout room later, then yeah, feel free to kind of ask Cynthia any questions as well as Maureen. Maureen, without further ado, I'll pass over to you now. And would you like to share the slides, or should that come in a minute? You're on mute at the moment, Maureen.
Yes, sorry, I didn't realise I was still on mute. Yeah.
I'll share the slides.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I cannot see the slides at the moment.
Okay.
Why is that?
Well, while you're doing that, can I ask, does anybody know anything about Chaco? Leeds, Chaco from Leeds? Anybody? No? Have they moved to our website?
Got some thumbs up there.
Oh, have we? Chaco? Anybody Chaco? Anybody know about Chaco?
Well, yeah. Only the brief introduction you gave earlier in the breakout room, Maureen.
Oh, okay.
Can you see that?
Not yet.
No.
Okay.
We've got Bill Phelps also, who's been our chair, sitting in there as well, so we can get Bill to, oh, don't you dare mute Bill. Can come in and
I seem to be having a problem with sharing that, and I'm trying to stop sharing and it won't let me.
Okay.
I wonder, Claire, if you're there and you have the PDF available, can you share?
No problem, I'll just find the PDFs.
Is the host wrong? Chris Coates is host at the moment.
I think Alan's just dropped off.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nicola. Hopefully Claire will be able to, I know Alan was having technical difficulties yesterday as well. So obviously the weather is still the same up in Aberystwyth. So hopefully Claire can share Maureen's presentation now and we can get going. It's not a Zoom call without somebody having technical difficulties.
Absolutely. It's usually me.
Yeah, we definitely had some thumbs up from everybody in the room about Chaco, Maureen. So hopefully everyone knows a little bit about your project.
That's great. That's great. Okay.
How do you spell it? Sorry, Maureen.
Chaco, C-H-A-C-O. Chaco Cohousing.
Chaco.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh. There you are.
Hopefully everyone can see that now.
Okay.
Thanks, Claire. Over to you, Maureen.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for letting us talk about Chaco. There's Cynthia, myself, and Bill Phelps, who's in there. Hi, Bill. Chaco. Chaco's been started in 2010 with a small group of people who was very interested in social justice, in community living, and looking at how they can share living together. And they are all part of living in Chapeltown. Bit the background of Chapeltown, first of all. Chapeltown is a very multicultural area of Leeds. I think it's the most richest part of Leeds in terms of diversity, in terms of social interaction, in terms of diversity. I think it's one of the best. I think it is the best area in Leeds in terms of that. So if anyone to do a co-housing, it'll be in Leeds, in Chapeltown. That's the best place for it to be in. Chapeltown's got lots of different communities living, and it's a warm, very warm part of Leeds, with different cultures, different ethnicity, different age group, different, so we have a very, very rich diversity here in Chapeltown. And over the years, it's had a really, really bad reputation as Leeds, which is not really called for Leeds. It's for Chapeltown. It's been magnified, and there's worse areas in Leeds, I can assure you, than Chapeltown. But it always seems to have that label, and it's fantastic that Chaco is actually doing something about building up Chapeltown and looking at diversity, looking at culture, looking at shared living, economical living, economical living, and so that's the best part of Chaco, the actual looking at community living, and community living that's open to all people who have different ethnicity, diversity, culture, sexuality. It's open to all, and that's the richness of Chaco. So we are very proud of that. I think Chaco would say that it was inspired by Lanark, who's one of the initial self-build organization, and we sort of joined Lanark and see how they moved, what they were doing, how they did business, and how we could make our community work. However, that is a different part of Leeds, and we wanted to stay. Chaco wanted to stay in. I always say we, Bill. I know. Chaco wanted to stay in the Chapeltown area because of the nature of the people that's in Chapeltown, and it felt it met all the criteria for the co-housing, what it wanted as a co-op, in terms of family dynamics, in terms of culture, in terms of different ethnicity. It matched all the criteria that we as a co-op wanted. There's Bill, will you on block? Can we unblock Bill?
Yeah, I'm on
yeah. I want to bring Bill in there at the moment because he's been our chair for a very long time. It was initial part of Chaco to start with. So, Bill, can you?
Okay, just to point out that I stepped down as chair on Sunday, and I've been taken over by David, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but was going to be with us.
Yes.
But, yeah, so I've got a lot of the history. I know a lot of the history of how it started, but it's grown from a small bunch of friends around the kitchen table, half a dozen people sort of dreaming back in sort of 2010. So, well, we're probably going to end up with about 45 adults and 20 children in sort of 29 homes. So as you see on the illustration there. So, so we've been experiencing some of the growth pains, I think, of, you know, how you get from a small group to a big group. And I'm now probably part of the problem as having sort of founder syndrome. You know, I'm old guard and sort of likely to go on about, well, that wasn't the original idea. Yeah, but it all has to be thrashed out by consensus. But Maureen, back to you. I don't think it's supposed to be me doing this presentation.
No, that's great. I just wanted a bit in you.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I'd want people to ask, you know, I know I'm going to ask questions in a moment, but is there anything anybody would want to hear about Chaco?
Hi, Maureen, it's Michelle from Toronto, and I'm wondering about the financing model and how people are buying in and or renting spaces in your community.
Yeah, okay. There's shared ownership and there's renting and there's buying. Yeah, so it's all shared ownership because Chaco still has, as an organization, keep 95% is what that's what people can get as a mortgage, and the 5%, or is it 1% now, Bill? It's 1% now. 1% is kept as Chaco as a co-op. We want it to keep as a co-op, so people, you know, it's not for people to be buying out of their property. It's actually, we have a system of being a prospective member. You come in, you're a prospective member, and then you work through through development of the group and go through meetings and join in all the involvement in decision making, and then you work your way up to full membership, from a prospective member to full membership, and then once you're a full member, you're entitled to, well, to buy in-house or rent. We have how many rented accommodations we have?
I think it's 13 at the moment.
Is it 13 rented?
Yeah, that's including the.
That's including the shared house.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's five shared in the shared house. Yeah. Okay. There are 4 as we say, we can see on there, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, duplex houses, 4-bedroom houses, 3-bedroom duplex houses, 3-bedroom houses. Duplex are sort of flat on top of where house on top of a flat. Well, they're flat on top of the flat, and yeah. And we have a common house, which is the common house where we do a lot of the social gathering and and eat together, have meetings, discussions. That's going to be a central part of our coming together, really. And as you can see from there, it's affordable. We try to make it as affordable as we can. Low energy, rent to buy, community led, and corporate. These are the criteria of what we do. And we have there's a plot that's been allocated for self-build. So those are people who want to build their own homes, and that's allocated to self-builders. We also had, where's Unity? Is that part of the self-building bill, the Unity?
The Unity Housing Association, so
Yeah.
they're our development partners. They're developing the whole site, but apart from that, they don't have any say in how Chaco is.
Chaco, yeah, it's just that they're written, yeah.
We're sort of viewing this diagram from, say, from the main Unity building, so it's sort of behind us, in effect.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. They have car parks for shared. We're looking at shared car shares at the moment. Cynthia, are you?
Oh yeah, do you want me to
Yes,
talk?
yep.
Should we move down the slides a bit, because I think there's 3 slides on there. Can you just scroll down to the next slide?
And the next one. That's our opening of the land. Right. Are you there, Cynthia?
Yeah. So that's Bill's new toy. He's got a drone, and so he's or maybe it's from it must be from the drone. And so that's where we are at the moment. We're sort of, I don't know, about probably halfway through the project, I'd say, and you can see how the area is developing. It's not a massive area really, and I think one of the things that we were really lucky was that Leeds Council have been very supportive on the project. And this site, we managed to get this site, and I think that's one of the things that's a bit of a challenge to community housing, is to actually be able to get affordable sites, because you're up against developers who will be trying to land bank particular areas. So one of the things is with Chapeltown, as Maureen mentioned, it's sort of inner city, urban area. So I think the land was probably a bit cheaper. We were also able to get some funding from Homes England to help with the affordability issues. So there'll be grants. We've got the Help to Buy scheme is going to be on the site, as well as doing some affordable rent. And some of that will be funded by the cooperative itself. One of the things I wanted to talk about was our allocations policy. I think Bill won't mind me saying that the founding members were of a certain class and a certain race. And although they had lived in Chapeltown for a long time and probably had more connections than I do, for example, with Chapeltown. But what we were really keen to do is reflect the area that we live in. So we try to recruit members from Chapeltown. We want to have, I think it's at least, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, 15% of people originate from Chapeltown. And then we've also got quotas, so positive action quotas for people along the lines of ethnicity. We want it to be intergenerational, so we want young and old people and families living there. We've got a house in multiple occupation, which will be a shared house, so that we get younger people coming to live with us. And as Maureen mentioned, along the lines of sexuality, so LGBT plus, and also we're trying to make it affordable so low-income people are able to join the project. And then lastly as well, we want to make it accessible to all. So we have a quota of people who consider themselves having disabilities, so they'll be able to join the project. I actually was studying a master's in social and cultural geography and came across Chaco. I wanted to move back up to Yorkshire because I'm from there, and it just seemed like a really nice place. Everybody's really friendly and lovely, and the whole ethos of community housing and just living together and sharing meals was really appealing to me, especially coming from the lonely big smoke of London where I'm working right now. But yeah, and later on I can talk about, and I think all of us can talk about in the breakout rooms, any other questions that people have. But I don't know if there was any questions in the chat, or if Maureen or Bill has anything else to add.
I'm not sure how much time we've got on this slot.
Yes, that's what I'm
No,
thinking.
that's it. Brilliant as it was. I need to invite the next speaker to contribute, and then yeah, we've got the breakout rooms and any time at the end for Q&As. But thank you so much. Unfortunately, the winds in mid Wales blew me off Zoom. But I managed to get back in, and thanks, I think, Claire, for picking that up and carrying it on. So there we go, teamwork. Yes, so now I'll be very pleased to introduce Simin Wadiwala, who is part of Student Co-op Homes and Sea Salt Housing Cooperative in Brighton. And I'll let you introduce the rest, Simin. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alan. So interesting to hear about Chapeltown. I feel like I've heard the name a couple of times, but didn't really know anything about it. And yeah, so cool to see like the development in progress and all of the range of different housing models, and all of those the things that you talked about at the end, keeping places for people in the community, and having spaces for queer and disabled people. That's really inspiring that you can do that. So yeah, hi, my name is Simin Wadiwala, or Sim. I'm 24, I live in Brighton, and I'm involved in student housing cooperatives. So I moved to Brighton for university, and got involved with a cooperative, a bicycle cooperative at the time, and that sort of moved me on to understanding what the co-op model was, I think. And later on, when there was some noise about setting up a student housing co-op, I was very keen and really wanted to be part of it. And I think something I want to point out at this juncture is just quite how inspiring it has been for me as a person from a generation very much born into very entrenched neoliberal capitalist society. I have never known a time when housing was affordable in the area that I'm living in. And when I was a student, for example, it was very, very easy to not be able to imagine an alternative to the system of mostly private rented student housing around me. And I think I'm very grateful to the cooperative model, both like the bicycle workers co-op that started me off, and now housing cooperatives, showing me that even on a very, very small scale, it is possible to have different economic models that function just as well and even better sometimes. Yeah, so okay, I'll talk a bit about what it means for the student aspect of housing cooperatives, because I'm sure you're all quite familiar with community-led housing in general, and then I'll go on to the financing mechanism. And I know we haven't got loads of time left, and we want to have space for breakout rooms, so just send me a reminder or interrupt me when I need to wind up. Okay, so how are student housing co-ops different from other community-led housing models? Well, I suppose the first one that kind of is quite key is the temporary nature of students. So most students are we're talking about higher education in general. So 3 to 5 years. And so right from the start, we say, and a lot of student housing co-ops say that you can be a member for at least 1 year, but up to 3 years, and you can stay a member of the housing co-op for up to a year after graduating. And that's to sort of help in acclimatizing to graduating and not being a student anymore. And I've at least found that that's really, really helpful for me, just in terms of having some sort of stability after you graduate, I guess. I should say CSOP, Student Housing Cooperative, set up in 2018. And that was when I joined it. I was in the final year of university, I'm undergraduate. And we don't actually have a house yet. I'll talk about that, but we're hoping to be housed this year, this academic year. So yes, the ownership model of student housing co-ops is different than a lot of other models, in that we don't expect students to come in with equity. That would be a bit silly. And it is very much a case of students renting from the cooperative, but the cooperative in itself does not own the property. It is leased from another organisation. Now in the UK there are 4 housed student housing co-ops, and Brighton soon to be housed, and they are owned by, a few are owned by the Phone Cooperative, some are owned by Student Co-op Homes, and the one that CSOL will be owned by Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust. So we've been quite lucky in that we're able to partner with our local CLT, and the timing really worked out, and they are quite happy to take on ownership of the property, give it a long-term lease, 7 years, to CSOLs who can take on the day-to-day running of it. And I think probably in my head everyone knows this, but I should still reiterate, student housing is notorious for being very, very poor quality. And maybe partly this is because students get taken advantage of. They're often younger people and are living by themselves for the first time. And it's, I'd say, pretty uncommon for you to get your deposit back in full, for example, when you're renting. But just things like the general upkeep of the house is quite poor. I live in the southeast, obviously housing is really expensive here, and students pay really, really high rents for actually quite poor housing. So, you know, all of these things kind of meant that it has seemed quite logical and definitely something that needed to happen to set up an alternative, a housing co-op. So with First in the South, and hopefully not the only one, but yeah, there's 5 or 6 groups currently setting up all across the country, and you know, generally expanding. But the student housing co-op movement in the UK is fairly new. The first one set up in 2014, and yeah, so it's been less than a decade really. So quickly, financing mechanism. So it functions fairly similar to other schemes in that you get a mortgage, 80%, and yeah, that covers a significant chunk of it. But for the rest of it, there's 20% plus day one renovation costs that we needed to pay for. CSOL worked with Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust to run a community share offer. And that was on an ethical investment platform called Ethics. And we ran that for most of last year. We launched it right at the end of February 2020, which is great timing. But I think that just meant that we extended it until basically the end of 2020. And we managed to go over our target. We raised £300,000. And that money is basically anyone from the UK could invest and buy a share of Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, and they can keep their money in there, and for as long as they do, they will earn annual interest of 3%, but then they can take that money off, money out when they need to. So that community share offer was really successful, and we had a lot of support locally, but also nationally, and a lot of kind of recognition that it's important that alternatives are financed. So just looking at my notes. Yeah, when we eventually move in, the rental income will pay off mortgage payments, community shares payments, and also everyday maintenance costs. We are coming to, I stepped down as chair recently, but we're having these interesting discussions with CLT right now about negotiating the lease and who becomes responsible for what aspects of upkeep of the house. But yeah, I understand that this is quite a bit different, not entirely different, but a little bit from other community housing schemes, and probably gonna stop there and take any questions. Or, yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Sim. It's so nice of you to come to our network event, and I know it's certainly one thing that I'd like to champion, to have our first student housing co-op in Wales at some point, and hopefully we'll be able to invite you back for a longer session when we've worked out our different relationships with universities across Wales and move that forward. But yeah, it's so inspiring to hear what you're doing down in Brighton and generally across the UK. And thank you very much for doing that work. So we've got about 13 minutes left. But I think I would like to send everybody for at least a short time into breakout rooms, and then bring people back for any final questions. I mean, we can go on beyond the 1:30 time, that's no problem. But obviously people need to do other things or have other meetings to go to, or whatever they have in their lives right now. Yeah, I'll work on the breakout rooms, and I wondered maybe I could give an opportunity to Dave Palmer to talk about the event that's coming up soon for intentional communities, or Kath Boswell, if she's in the room still. I can't see everybody. Thank you. Dave or Kath, are you there?
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah. On the 25th of June this year, the Cardiff Metropolitan University is holding an online intentional community symposium, and I will post in the chat a link to it. And they have 6 or 7 international speakers speaking in the morning, and then in the afternoon there's a series of workshops, and one of them will be a virtual tour around Cannon Froome, which is a co-op just east of Hereford, and Diggers and Dreamers are also doing a workshop, and another workshop is community-led housing harder than normal house building. So it's only £20 for a full day. So I would encourage people to go to that before you go into your breakout rooms, and I'll put the clip in shortly.
Brilliant, thanks Dave, that's fantastic. I'm going to open up the rooms now. I know it's Claire's just posted a link to that in the chat. That's great, thank you. Yeah, so this was about looking at now. These are the now rooms. and maybe like asking the question, what does success look like to you guys? Okay, opening up the rooms now. I'll see you back here in 6 minutes. I've just made this a bit shorter so we have some time at the end. Thank you. Brilliant. I think everybody has come back into the room. So we have 3 minutes left of the official time allocated. As I say, we can run on, but people probably, lots of people probably don't want to and will be keen to leave, which is absolutely fine. But I don't know, we've been looking at the chat and there was a question from Owen about were there any Robert Owen type figures that we recognise today. So I don't know if anybody wants to have a go at that. Chris Coates, can you see him without? Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that question and I did ponder on it. I can't think of anybody. I can't think of anybody with that sort of breadth of influence and experience in so many different fields. So no, sorry.
Thanks, Chris. I had a question from Christine Watson about loan stock. It's potentially one that we should follow up later with you, Christine, as it's quite a detailed conversation. We can do that. But yeah, I don't know if there's any loan stock people in the room at this moment. I don't know if anybody has any kind of more questions for any of our speakers today. Please just show your hand or turn your mic on, and happy to. Niall, we've got there first of all.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering what Chris might think of William Thompson, who was a contemporary of Robert Owen, because I think Chris explained well the flaws with Robert Owen. He's still a genius and towering figure, I think. But William Thompson learned a lot from him, then clashed with him a lot. And it was over the issues of democracy, that it should be, he argued it should be community-led rather than going to the rich and privileged to get them to help set up these communities. And the scale of the communities was a debate also that they had. And he was based in Ireland, but he met Owen and was at some of the congresses where they fought this out, these arguments in the early 1830s. I just think it's a very interesting debate, and it just shows that it was, you know, Owen was a huge figure, but he wasn't the only figure, and there's quite a good discussion and debate going on at that stage. I think we could still learn a lot from it as how co-ops could be run today.
I would agree. I think William Thompson is sort of one of the forgotten characters from that early co-op movement, along with one or two others as well. And yeah, and there is a sort of clear line into the slightly later Chartists, and beyond that. I mean, Edward Craig, who was the manager at the community I showed in Ireland, pops up in the Chartist movement, and pops up in William Morris's at the end of his life in William Morris's sort of Socialist League. So there really is a continuity of people bringing their experience, and they are the sort of forgotten characters who in some ways kept the whole thing moving along, whilst sort of Owen swanned off to America and and the Owen family had a huge influence in America. Yeah, I didn't even want to sort of go there in 10 minutes, but yeah, I would agree. Yeah, look up William Thompson if anyone's interested in the sort of historic side of the Owenite movement.
Thank you both. Joe, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a question for you, Chris. Sorry again on this spot. just thinking about some of the models that you've showed us today, the Robert Owen ones, they're built around, you know, the factories being in the middle. So there's this ethos, and some of the others being kind of on farm workers. What's the difference between Robert Owen's thinking and say like Bourneville, which was housing for the workers?
Not a lot, really. I mean, there is the sort of model of the philanthropic sort of mill owner providing work for sort of decent housing for their workforce. There is a sort of flip side, is that actually I mean, if you look at places like Saltaire in West Yorkshire, it was as much about controlling your workforce, having them in houses that you controlled, having some control over your workforce outside of the sort of factory environment. So there were two sides to it, but yeah, I mean, somewhere like Bourneville, clearly, I mean, you've got the Quaker influence there as well, but clearly has a sort of, you can trace ideas back, and I think they would have said, yes, Robert Owen was one of the people who they would have been aware of and inspired them. But it is that model of the sort of benevolent capitalist is different from what they were talking about in William Thompson, a grassroots democratic organisation.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thanks both. Tracy has a hand up.
Chatco, question to Chatco. What energy are they using on their community-led development, and also their transport? How do they operate shared transport?
On energy, we've got we started long enough ago, so well, it's still the case that it's hard to find something that's as cheap to install as gas boilers. But we've also, on all the south-facing roofs, of which we've got quite a lot, we've got as much photovoltaic as we can fit. So that's the energy side of things. And we've also got a private wire coming into the organisation, so that all of the instead of each house having its own electricity supply from the grid, we've got one supply going to from the grid, and then we sell the electricity on to our residents, and all the electricity we generate from the photovoltaic panels is aggregated and goes back to the grid. On the carpool, it's quite a problem setting up carpools now because insurance is getting more and more difficult. So, is there any specific question about that?
It's just that, do you operate within the organisation, or do you employ people to operate it for you, to contract it out?
We'll probably set up a separate cooperative, because we would like other people in the neighbourhood around to be able to use it. But not, so it'll be a sort of parallel cooperative to Chaco with a strong connection linked to it. Yeah, we want it to be a bit broader. But basically, if you want to share cars, you need to be able to put in a bit of work on, recording the mileage and, sorting everything out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Philip, I think, has a question.
Thank you, Alan. I vividly remember as a young boy, I'm 68 now, but when I was a young boy, I lived with my grandma on my mum's side of the family. And the houses that she lived in, there were 3 rows of terraced houses, and they belonged to they were local authority houses. But prior to that, they belonged to the coal board. They belonged to the coal board. And when my granddad couldn't work, and my 2 uncles, my grandma's sons, when they left the coal board, no one in that house worked for the coal board or for the coal owners. So my grandma was faced with eviction because part of the tenancy meant you had to work at the pit. And because her husband, my granddad, couldn't work at the pit, her two sons, my uncles, left the pit. My grandma and my mum and my auntie was facing eviction. It's going back a few years, this. And the other question I'd like to put is agricultural tenancies and people working on the land, obviously. What security of tenure have people got these days? Because there must be hundreds of tenures: cooperative housing, local authority housing, housing association housing, the defence homes, agency housing, ecclesiastical housing. I think we need all concept of housing needs a complete rethink.
Thanks, Philip.
It's a long question.
So yes, security of tenure. Does any one of our speakers want to sort of tackle that general thought or question? Chris.
I mean, I can have a comment on it. I mean, you're right. I mean, and I don't know whether the new Lanark would have been in the same position, but they would have been essentially tied houses, with tied to working there. And yeah, I mean, they are not a form of community-led housing, I would say. They're clearly a way of, as I mentioned earlier, keeping control over the people you work for, looked at sort of harshly. The other big sort of spoiler, if you like, has been the right to buy, in that has reduced the stock of housing where you would have had a right to tenure. It's just sort of taken it out of the rental market. So yeah, I mean, the history of council housing clearly goes back to community-led housing, largely out of the Garden Village movement, inspiring council houses, inspiring councils to build them. I think you're right. There are all sorts of problems, even with sort of things like leasehold, and developers putting sort of, I mean, leasehold is really another form of tenure. We might see it as sort of quasi-ownership, but it's not. And the owners of the freehold can put all sorts of conditions on. So I think there are all sorts of problems. I don't know who's going to sort them out.
Thank you. And we probably won't get them all sorted today, so we should probably call a close on the session, but some loads of really interesting questions and thoughts, and thank you, Philip, for sharing your story with us. Yeah, welcome you all back in a month's time. If you can join us on June the 17th, we'll be back. And in the meantime, yeah, just feel free to get in contact with any one of us. There's Joe, Casey, Dave, myself, and Claire. So yeah, please get in touch. And I just remains me just want to thank the speakers again for coming today and sharing your incredible projects. And yeah, really great to see you all and know that you're out there doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Diolch.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is from Jacko.
Brilliant.
Great
Thanks,
to meet you
Maureen.
guys.
Yeah,
Great
thanks,
to meet
Alan.
you.
Really good to speak.
Really good to speak again, Sim. Yeah, take care.
And really good to hear about Chapeltown. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully see you again sometime.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.